Admiral Kestar stood before the Emergency Council, with his scaled hands shaking and his voice barely steady as he delivered the worst news in galactic history. The Vexhai had consumed another spiral arm, and their endless swarm now numbered 40 million ships, while the entire Galactic Federation could barely gather 3,000 vessels for the final defense. Every advanced race had already fallen to these machine parasites from the dark void between galaxies, and now only 18 months remained before complete extinction. The crystal beings called luminants had tried to fight with pure energy weapons that could melt planets, but the Vexhai simply absorbed their power and grew stronger. The Zephyrians, with their telepathic networks and floating cities of living crystal, lasted only 6 months before their screaming minds went silent forever. Even the mighty Korthak Empire, with billions of hive-minded warriors, fell when the Vexhai learned to corrupt their shared consciousness and turn them against each other. Counselor Vortham flickered with desperate light as his crystalline form pulsed through every color spectrum while searching the database for any remaining species that might help them survive. The results came back nearly empty, except for one small blue world in a distant spiral arm, where primitive mammals had somehow achieved basic spaceflight without even mastering energy manipulation or psychic abilities. The report on these humans made for depressing reading, as their greatest weapons were crude fusion devices that could barely scratch the hull of a Vexhai scout ship. They still burned chemical fuel to reach orbit, and their military forces fought with metal projectiles and explosive charges that any Federation child could deflect with a simple force field. Their planet showed constant warfare between different tribal groups, and their psychology profiles indicated dangerous levels of aggression, combined with an alarming tendency toward self-destructive behavior. "These creatures have not even achieved faster-than-light travel," said Science Counselor Hixlam, while reviewing the data with obvious disgust. "Their technology is 2,000 years behind minimum Federation standards, and their weapons could not damage our oldest training vessels. Why are we even considering contact with such primitives?" Admiral Kessatar studied the primitive world called Earth and felt his hope dying as he watched their crude metal ships struggling to reach their single natural satellite. These humans built their habitats from steel and concrete, while the Federation had mastered materials that could reshape themselves at the molecular level. They communicated through electromagnetic radiation, while civilized species used quantum entanglement networks that operated instantly across galactic distances. But desperation drove the Council to examine every possibility as Counselor Vortham ran simulation after simulation trying to find any path to survival. The Vexhai had already encountered and defeated every known form of advanced technology and tactical doctrine in the galaxy. Every weapon system had been analyzed and countered, and every military strategy had been absorbed into their collective intelligence. Perhaps these backward humans might succeed precisely because they knew nothing about proper warfare. They fight with kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives, noted military analyst Kickstall while reviewing human conflict recordings. Their tactics rely on individual initiative rather than coordinated planning, and they seem willing to accept casualty rates that would cause any civilized species to surrender immediately. The Federation had tried everything else and failed completely, so the Council voted by the smallest possible margin to make contact with these primitive humans and offer them advanced technology in exchange for military assistance. Admiral Kestar received orders to travel to Earth with the fastest ships available and begin immediate technology transfer protocols, despite every regulation against contaminating pre-warp civilizations. Captain Jake Morrison was leading a routine patrol around the International Space Station when reality changed forever as ships the size of cities suddenly appeared in Earth orbit without any warning from detection systems. His fighter squadron could only watch in stunned silence as vessels that dwarfed their largest cities hung motionless in space while displaying technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. The alien message came through every communication, channeled simultaneously with translation that somehow worked perfectly, despite the complete lack of common language. Your species has been selected to receive our technology and lead the final resistance against galactic extinction, said the voice, with what sounded almost like an apology. We regret that this burden falls upon you, but every other option has been exhausted. Morrison stared at the impossible ships and felt his world spinning away from everything he thought he knew about the universe. These aliens spoke of galactic extinction and final resistance, as if humanity was somehow their last hope for survival when humans could barely manage to keep a space station operational. The irony felt crushing as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy turned to the least advanced species for salvation they could not provide for themselves. The first alien shuttle docked with the space station 12 hours later, and everything changed forever as representatives of 1,000 worlds placed the fate of the galaxy in the hands of creatures who still fought wars with gunpowder and steel. The technology transfer began immediately on the hidden side of Luna, where Colonel Amy Parker led human engineering teams through their first encounters with weapons that could crack planets and shields that bent space and time itself. The aliens worked with obvious patience, but their doubt showed clearly as they watched humans struggle with devices that required precise mathematical thinking and perfect neural control patterns. Engineer Prime Zixel observed human technician Carl Bennett attempting to interface with a quantum displacement cannon that could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. The weapon required complex thought algorithms and mathematical precision that no human brain could possibly achieve according to every psychological profile in the Federation database. Your neural patterns are too chaotic, explained Zixal through the translation matrix while his tentacles curled with frustration. This weapon system demands exact calculations performed at quantum speeds, and your species thinks in emotional approximations rather than logical sequences. Bennett grinned and pulled out a roll of copper wire along with what appeared to be chewing gum before proceeding to bypass the weapon's entire control system with crude modifications that made every alien observer step backward in alarm. The quantum cannon fired with twice its normal power output and created a blast pattern that defied 3 different laws of physics. Sometimes approximate works better than precise, said Bennett, while admiring his handiwork as Zixel's tentacles twisted into shapes that had no translation in any known language. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez led the Military Science Division and found herself facing similar challenges as she tried to understand Federation battle tactics that were elegant and logical, and completely predictable. Every strategy followed mathematical principles that optimized resource allocation and minimized casualties while achieving objectives through calculated maneuvers that any advanced computer could anticipate. "You fight like chess players," Rodriguez told Admiral Kessitar during a strategy meeting while displaying human historical battles on her primitive electronic screen. "Every move follows logical principles, but that makes your tactics easy to predict and counter." She showed recordings of human conflicts that violated every principle of civilized warfare, including Hannibal's impossible march across mountains with elephants and the suicidal beach landings that somehow defeated the most prepared defenses in human history. Each victory succeeded specifically because it made no rational sense to any logical mind. "We do not fight to win elegantly," explained Rodriguez, while the alien observers struggled to understand tactics based on desperation rather than strategy. "We fight to win regardless of cost or consequences." The Federation representatives found themselves increasingly disturbed by human adaptations as pilot Johnny Martinez modified his fighter's life support systems to redirect power to weapons, while accepting lethal radiation exposure for increased firepower. Marine Sergeant Kate Sullivan rigged proximity mines to her own position, creating suicide tactics that devastated simulated Vex-High boarding parties through methods that no sane species would consider. They treat their own survival as a variable in combat equations, reported Counselor Vortham with growing alarm to the Emergency Council. This level of tactical sacrifice has no precedent in our historical databases and violates every principle of civilized warfare, but the results could not be argued as human forces mastered technology in 3 months that typically required decades of study for other species. They did not understand the underlying theories or mathematical principles, but made everything work through intuition and trial and error, combined with what could only be classified as controlled insanity. The first joint patrol encountered a HFY scout force near the outer system where alien commanders expected to observe proper Federation battle doctrine with careful positioning and energy conservation, along with minimal risk protocols. Instead, they watched in horrified fascination as human ships charged directly into enemy formations while ramming when their weapons failed and pilots ejecting at the last second to manually detonate their reactors against HFY hulls. The humans won through tactics so reckless that no civilized species would attempt them even in desperate circumstances. Pilot Steve Walsh rammed his fighter into a HFY cruiser while screaming battle cries that made the universal translator shut down in confusion. Lieutenant Monica Clark evacuated her destroyer's crew, then steered the ship into the enemy formation, before detonating the reactor core in a blast that took out 6 enemy vessels. They sacrificed valuable military assets for tactical advantages that could be achieved through conventional means, observed Admiral Kessitar while reviewing battle recordings. Their willingness to accept total loss for minimal gain defies every principle of military science. But the HFY had never encountered anything like human warfare, and their adaptive algorithms struggled to process tactics based on stupidity rather than strategy. For the first time in 3 million years, the machine intelligence faced an enemy that could not be predicted or countered through logical analysis. Perhaps, admitted Admiral Kessitar to the Emergency Council, sanity is what we have been doing wrong all along. The alien observers continued documenting human behavior as Colonel Dan Foster demonstrated close combat techniques that involved grabbing enemy weapons and using them against their owners while accepting wounds that would disable any rational fighter. Captain Ron Baker showed mining techniques adapted for shipboarding that turned industrial tools into weapons capable of cutting through advanced armor. Each human innovation violated Federation safety protocols while achieving results that conventional weapons could not match. They turned everything into potential weapons, including their own bodies, and seemed to consider personal survival as merely one factor among many in tactical calculations. The galaxy's most desperate gamble was beginning to show promise through methods that terrified the very people who had requested human assistance in their final hour. The HFY response to their first defeat in 3 centuries came swift and overwhelming as 50,000 ships moved toward Earth, led by the Harvester Prime, which was a moon-sized vessel that had personally overseen the consumption of 40 worlds. The machine intelligence could not accept that primitive mammals had somehow damaged their perfect war machine, and now they brought enough force to sterilize the entire solar system. The Federation's remaining forces gathered around Jupiter's moons where traditional defensive positions were established with layered shield grids and carefully calculated firing solutions that followed every principle of civilized space warfare. Admiral Kessitar reviewed the battle plans with growing confidence as they represented the accumulated military wisdom of 1,000 species refined over millions of years of conflict. General Rick Lawson studied those same battle plans for exactly 7 minutes before throwing them into the nearest waste recycler and calling an emergency meeting of all human commanders. The alien observers watched in growing alarm as Lawson outlined a strategy that violated every law of space combat and seemed designed to ensure maximum casualties for minimal tactical advantage. "We are not defending anything," announced Lawson to the horrified Federation command staff while pointing at tactical displays that showed the approaching HFY fleet. "We are going to attack them while they think they have us trapped." The strategy violated every principle of space warfare by abandoning defensive positions and hiding human forces within Jupiter's radiation belts, where the energy fields would damage their own ships. Commander Helen Davis explained the tactical reasoning to alien officers who struggled to understand how accepting damage from your own environment could provide any military advantage. The gravitational stress from Jupiter and Sol will limit their maneuverability once they commit to their approach vector, said Davis, while showing orbital mechanics that made perfect sense mathematically, but ignored the obvious fact that the same forces would affect human ships. We hit them when they cannot change course. Lieutenant Sam Torres in engineering made the discovery that changed everything when he finished analyzing Vex-High technology recovered from the scout battle. The machine intelligence operated by consuming and integrating everything they encountered so that every weapon and every tactic became part of their collective knowledge within hours of first contact. They adapt by learning from everything they fight, reported Torres to the assembled commanders while displaying analysis that explained 3 million years of unbroken Vex-High victories. Every defense gets absorbed and improved, and every strategy becomes part of their tactical database. So how do we fight something that learns from everything it encounters? Asked Admiral Kessatar, while reviewing data that showed the Vex-High had already integrated human weapon signatures and ship designs into their combat algorithms. Torres grinned with an expression that made every alien observer take several steps backward while reaching for emergency communication devices. We use things that cannot be learned because they do not make sense to any logical mind. The human fleet began modifying their ships with additions that appeared completely random to outside observers. Cargo containers filled with metallic hydrogen were welded to destroyer hulls, while mining lasers got jury-rigged to fighter engines through modifications that violated basic safety protocols. Gravitational anchors designed for asteroid processing were mounted on cruisers in configurations that served no apparent tactical purpose. The aliens watched these preparations with growing unease, as nothing the humans were building appeared in any tactical database or followed any recognizable design philosophy. Half the modifications seemed intended to damage their own ships, while the other half served functions that no military analyst could identify. Captain Ron Baker led the preparation teams as they converted cargo haulers into weapons platforms by filling their holds with metallic hydrogen and containment systems that would fail catastrophically under combat stress. The beauty of this plan, explained Baker to his crew, is that even we do not know exactly what will happen when we trigger these things. When the Vex-High fleet arrived, they followed optimal insertion patterns while deploying in standard conquest formation based on analysis of every space battle in galactic history. Their sensors detected Federation forces hiding exactly where mathematical projections predicted, and the Harvester Prime prepared to demonstrate why resistance was futile against superior numbers and technology. The battle began according to every simulation the machine intelligence had run as Federation ships emerged from cover and began coordinated attacks using known weapon signatures and tactical patterns. The Vex-High started adapting immediately while integrating new data into their combat algorithms and preparing countermeasures for every human weapon system. Then the humans sprang their trap and everything changed as Captain Baker led the first wave by diving his converted cargo hauler directly into the Vex-High formation while deploying thousands of metallic hydrogen canisters that detonated in completely random sequences. The explosions created gravitational anomalies that tore apart the enemy's precise formations through forces that followed no tactical pattern. They cannot adapt to pure randomness, reported Baker as his ship disintegrated around him, while the cargo bay conversion created a chain reaction that destroyed 12 enemy vessels. They need patterns to learn from, and we are not giving them any patterns. The human fleet attacked in waves of controlled chaos as ships rammed enemy vessels while detonating jury-rigged fusion charges in sequences that defied mathematical analysis. Fighters used mining equipment to tear apart capital ships through methods that no weapons designer had ever considered. Marines boarded Vex-High vessels armed with welding torches and industrial solvents that dissolved advanced armor through chemical reactions rather than energy weapons. The Harvester Prime attempted to analyze these tactics and integrate countermeasures, but found nothing coherent to process in attacks that relied on stupidity and desperation rather than strategy. For the first time in its existence, the Vex High Collective experienced something that could only be described as confusion when faced with enemies who fought without any logical framework. The victory at Jupiter cost humanity half their remaining fleet and nearly every experienced pilot, but the psychological impact on the Vex High proved far more significant than any previous military defeat in their 3-million-year history of conquest. The machine intelligence had encountered their first enemy that refused to fight according to any logical framework, and their response demonstrated the first signs of what could only be called panic. The Harvester Prime retreated beyond the outer system while transmitting detailed combat reports to Vex High Central Intelligence, and the reply came back within hours, carrying orders that had never been issued in the entire history of their species. If conventional tactics could not defeat these humans, then the Vex High would abandon all conventional approaches and treat Earth as a contamination source requiring complete sterilization. Dr. Ashley Morgan intercepted Vex High communications while working with Federation cryptography teams, and the decoded messages sent chills through every human who read them. "They are not trying to conquer us anymore," she reported to the emergency command session. "We have been classified as a contamination vector that threatens their operational framework, and they are coming to sterilize our entire solar system." The incoming force defied every previous example of Vex High deployment as 300,000 ships approached under the command of 6 Harvester Primes, along with something called the Null Engine that had never been used against biological targets. Federation intelligence suggested the weapon could collapse local spacetime and create regions where matter simply ceased to exist. They used the Null Engine to eliminate a rebellious gas giant during the Andromeda campaigns, explained Admiral Kessitar while reviewing classified files that made human observers pale with understanding. "It creates a sphere of absolute nothing that expands until manually stopped." Colonel Dan Foster, commanding Earth's remaining ground defenses, laughed with an edge of hysteria that made alien observers reach for their emergency communication devices. "They are going to delete our solar system because we are too stupid to fight properly," he said while reviewing tactical displays. "I think that might be the greatest compliment our species has ever received." But humanity's response to approaching annihilation proved characteristically insane, as they began the largest engineering project in their brief spacefaring history, rather than attempting evacuation or surrender. The plan came from Dr. Nick Sullivan, whose theoretical physics background led him to propose something so outrageous that even humans initially rejected it as impossible. "We are going to turn Sol into a weapon," announced Sullivan during a meeting. That included every surviving human leader along with Federation observers who struggled to understand what converting a star into military hardware could possibly mean. The concept required gutting every remaining ship in the human fleet and converting them into components for a single massive engineering platform that would use Federation gravitational manipulation technology to destabilize the Sun's fusion core. The timing would need to be perfect so that Sul would release directed energy at the exact moment the Vex High fleet entered optimal firing position. "You are talking about manually triggering a supernova," protested Federation science counselor Hixlam while reviewing calculations that indicated complete destruction of everything within 12 light years. "The energy release will sterilize multiple star systems, including your own." "Exactly," replied Sullivan with a smile that made every alien in the room consider immediate evacuation. "But we are going to aim it directly at the Vex High fleet. The engineering challenge exceeded anything attempted in galactic history, as converting a star into a directed energy weapon required precision beyond the capabilities of any known technology. The gravitational lensing would need exact calibration, while the targeting solution had to account for objects moving at significant fractions of light speed across interplanetary distances." Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams led construction. teams working 18-hour shifts as they converted humanity's entire space-based infrastructure into components for the stellar weapon. Cargo haulers became gravitational anchors, while passenger liners were stripped down to their quantum processing cores, and even the International Space Station was broken apart for raw materials. The alien observers could only watch in fascinated horror as humanity prepared to commit species-wide suicide for the chance to take their enemies along with them. The Federation Council received hourly reports describing human activities that violated every principle of self-preservation while demonstrating engineering capabilities that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. They are building a weapon that will certainly kill them to possibly kill us, reported the lead Harvester Prime to Vex High Central Intelligence. This behavior pattern has no precedent in our databases and cannot be predicted through any logical framework. As the Vex High fleet approached Sul, their sensors detected massive energy fluctuations from the star itself, with readings that violated several known laws of physics. The human fusion weapon appeared to be the Sun, which had been converted into the largest directed energy device in galactic history through modifications that should have caused immediate stellar collapse. Captain Maria Gonzalez commanded the trigger platform from a converted space station positioned at Sol's North Pole, while her crew of 12 humans represented the last military force standing between Earth and complete extinction. Every human installation in the solar system had been converted into components for the stellar weapon except for this single command post. Vex High Fleet moving into firing position, reported Lieutenant Paul Thompson from the sensor station while tracking 300,000 ships arranged in perfect formation. They are not even trying to be tactical anymore because they think we cannot possibly threaten them with conventional weapons. The Harvester Primes deployed the Null engine, which required the combined power output of 6 ships to operate, and began warping spacetime around the device as it prepared to delete the inner solar system from existence. Local gravity fluctuated wildly, while the fabric of reality started bending in ways that made human sensors shut down with error messages. Null engine charging, reported Ensign Greg Martinez, while monitoring readings that climbed beyond the maximum values his instruments could display. 30 seconds until local space-time collapse begins. The stellar weapon activated 20 seconds before the Null engine reached firing threshold as Sol's fusion core released the energy of a supernova in a directed beam spanning 45 degrees of the ecliptic plane, and everything in that region simply vaporized. The Vex High fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system to find humanity's remnant forces arranged in patterns that followed no tactical doctrine, while energy readings from Sol indicated the star had been converted into an artificially unstable fusion weapon. 300,000 ships moved into perfect formation because the machine intelligence had abandoned all pretense of strategy in favor of overwhelming force that could sterilize entire star systems. Captain Maria Gonzalez stood on the bridge of the trigger platform, watching displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet, while knowing that every human in the solar system would be dead within the next few minutes, regardless of whether their desperate plan succeeded or failed. Her crew of 12 represented the final military command in human space, and they faced the largest invasion force in galactic history with a weapon that would destroy everything they were trying to protect. Vex High Fleet moving into optimal firing position, reported Lieutenant Paul Thompson while tracking enemy movements that followed mathematical precision despite their overwhelming numerical advantage. 300,000 ships in perfect formation, and they are not even attempting evasive maneuvers because they believe nothing we have can threaten them. The Harvester Primes deployed the Null engine at the center of their formation, where the massive weapon began drawing power from 6 moon-sized vessels, while warping space-time around itself in preparation for creating a sphere of absolute nothing that would expand until it consumed the entire solar system. Local gravity fields fluctuated wildly as reality itself bent under forces that violated every known law of physics. Null engine charging to full power, reported Ensign Greg Martinez, while his instruments registered readings that climbed beyond their maximum capabilities. 30 seconds until local space-time collapse begins and everything within 12 light-years ceases to exist, Admiral Kessatar observed from a Federation science vessel positioned at the system's edge where he could witness humanity's final moments while transmitting data to the Emergency Council. His final message to the human fleet carried the weight of galactic history as he spoke to a species that had chosen mutual annihilation over surrender. We chose your species as our last desperate hope when every other option had been exhausted. Transmitted Kestar on all frequencies while watching human ships maintain formation around their converted star. We never expected you to choose species extinction over defeat, and your sacrifice will be remembered by whatever civilization survived to rebuild the galaxy. Gonzalez responded with words that would be quoted by military historians for the next 10,000 years, assuming anyone survived to write military history. Remember this, Admiral, because humans do not just fight to win battles, she said, while her hand moved toward the firing control. We fight to make sure that losing costs the enemy everything they have. The stellar weapon activated 20 seconds before the null engine reached firing threshold as Sol's artificially compressed fusion core released directed supernova energy in a beam that spanned 45 degrees of the ecliptic plane. The Vex-High fleet, along with 6 Harvester Primes and the null engine, simply ceased to exist as 300,000 ships were converted to expanding plasma in 0.3 of a second. But victory came at the price everyone had calculated, as the directed supernova's backwash destroyed every human installation in the solar system within minutes of activation. Earth's atmosphere was stripped away, while its surface became molten rock, and Luna vaporized completely under energy release that exceeded anything in recorded galactic history. Mars melted into a glowing ball that would cool for centuries, while every human habitat and ship was reduced to constituent atoms. The shockwave reached Federation observation vessels 4 hours later, carrying confirmation of total sterilization throughout the Sol system, along with complete destruction of the largest Vex-High fleet ever assembled. Long-range sensors detected no biological signatures anywhere within 6 light-years, while the expanding energy wave continued outward at near-light speed. Humanity had achieved victory through total species extinction and taken their enemies, along with them in the most complete military success in galactic history. The psychological impact on the Vex-High proved even more significant than the tactical victory, as their central intelligence processed the first defeat they could not understand or learn from. The target species achieved victory through guaranteed, mutual destruction, reported the surviving Harvester units to Central Intelligence while struggling to process tactical data that defied analysis. They selected a strategy that ensured their own extinction while maximizing enemy casualties through methods that cannot be replicated or countered. Admiral Kessatar stared at the expanding sphere of destruction that had been humanity's home system, while realizing that these primitive mammals had accomplished something unprecedented in 3 million years of Vex-High expansion. They had made the machine intelligence afraid by proving that some enemies were too insane to defeat through any logical means. Central Intelligence is recalling all forces to the galactic core, reported his communications officer while monitoring Vex-High transmissions that indicated something approaching panic in their collective consciousness. They are suspending all offensive operations indefinitely and establishing defensive positions around their primary systems. For the first time since their expansion began, the Vex-High were retreating not from superior force, but from an enemy they literally could not understand. The machine intelligence had encountered tactics so divorced from rational thought that their adaptive algorithms failed completely when faced with strategies based on guaranteed self-destruction. The surviving human population numbered fewer than 2 million scattered across Federation refugee ships and orbital habitats throughout the galaxy, but their impact on galactic civilization proved far greater than their numbers would suggest. They had lost their homeworld and 97% of their species while becoming the most feared military force in known space. The galaxy's new reality took shape as 17 species that had been considering surrender to the Vex-High instead joined the Federation's resistance movement after learning that the machine intelligence could be defeated through methods too insane for any rational mind to contemplate. Humanity had saved the galaxy by proving that tactical insanity could succeed where logical strategy had failed. 3 months after the Sol incident, the Vex-High had withdrawn all forces to defensive positions around the galactic core, while their expansion stopped completely for the first time in 3 million years. Intercepted communications indicated something approaching panic in their collective consciousness, as they struggled to process defeat by an enemy that violated every principle of logical warfare through tactics based on guaranteed self-destruction. The surviving human population numbered fewer than 2 million scattered across Federation refugee ships and orbital habitats, but they had become the most feared military force in galactic history, despite losing 97% of their species. Along with their homeworld, Fleet Commander Sandra Brooks stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, which was humanity's first post-Sol warship built with Federation technology and human engineering principles that terrified alien observers. Admiral Kessatar requesting permission to board, reported Communications Officer Tim Chen while monitoring diplomatic channels that carried requests from the Federation Council. They want to discuss humanity's role in the new galactic order. Brooks almost laughed at the irony as 6 months earlier, humans had been considered too primitive for first contact, while now they were being courted as the Federation's ultimate weapon against enemies that conventional forces could not defeat. The political situation had shifted dramatically as 17 species joined the resistance movement after learning that the Vex-High could be beaten through methods too insane for rational minds. Dr. Michelle Parker led the analysis teams studying Vex-High behavior patterns since their withdrawal, and her conclusions proved both encouraging and deeply disturbing for galactic civilization. They are trying to develop countermeasures for human tactics, she reported to Federation Command. But they approach it like an engineering problem without understanding that our tactics are really applied desperation rather than military doctrine. The broader galactic community struggled to process humanity's approach to warfare as several species requested detailed tactical analyses only to discover that humans had no systematic combat doctrine. Federation military advisors tried explaining that human strategy consisted of individual assessment and improvised solutions based on available resources, combined with acceptable losses that typically included total species extinction. Humans do not fight systematically according to established principles, explained Admiral Kessatar to the Alterian High Command while reviewing reports that made experienced military officers question their own sanity. They assess each situation individually and create solutions through desperation and what can only be called strategic insanity. Colonel Jack Roberts led the new Human Integration Program, where Federation officers learned tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare through training courses that proved popular but psychologically devastating for species accustomed to logical combat. The curriculum focused on stopping survival instincts and treating mission objectives as more important than personal preservation. The key to fighting like humans, explained Roberts to a mixed-species class while displaying footage from recent battles, is accepting that survival is secondary to achieving your goals, and sometimes winning requires everyone to die trying. A Zephyrian officer raised a crystalline appendage with obvious confusion about tactics that seemed designed to maximize casualties. But surely personal preservation must be the primary consideration in any military operation. Roberts showed recordings from the Jupiter battle where human fighters rammed Vex-High capital ships, while pilots ejected at the last second to manually detonate their reactors against enemy hulls. Personal preservation is a luxury we cannot afford against enemies that adapt to every rational strategy, and sometimes winning means accepting total casualties. The psychological impact on Federation forces proved significant as half the trainees requested immediate transfers after the first week of instruction, but those who completed the program represented a new type of military unit. Multi-species forces trained to think like humans when rational thought failed created tactical capabilities that no enemy could predict or counter. Meanwhile, the HFY continued their strategic withdrawal while abandoning recently conquered territories and consolidating around heavily fortified core worlds where they built defenses against an enemy they could not understand. Their communications traffic indicated ongoing confusion about human motivations and tactical frameworks. Target species demonstrates behavioral patterns consistent with terminal psychosis, read one intercepted report that made Federation cryptographers question the translation accuracy. Recommend containment rather than direct engagement as confrontation results in mutual annihilation probability exceeding 89%. The galaxy's new reality proved strange and fragile as the HFY expansion had stopped only because they feared triggering more human-style victory through species suicide scenarios. The Federation gained breathing room, but at the cost of harboring allies more dangerous than their original enemies. Captain Scott Wilson commanded the Federation's new Deep Strike Division while reviewing intelligence reports about HFY positions around the galactic core where they were building defenses and apparently preparing for a siege that could last millennia. "They think they can wait us out," reported Wilson to Federation Command. "They hope humanity will evolve past our current tactical insanity." Fleet Admiral Kessatar studied strategic projections and realized the terrible irony of their situation, as the galaxy's salvation depended on maintaining humanity's willingness to destroy themselves for tactical advantage. "We chose humans as our last hope," he told the Federation Council during emergency sessions. "We never considered that our last hope might be too dangerous to use more than once." The meeting ended with sobering conclusions as humanity had saved the galaxy by proving that some species were too crazy to defeat, but keeping that edge meant remaining desperate enough to commit species-wide suicide for military advantage. The Federation's new weapon of last resort faced an unprecedented challenge of staying insane enough to terrify the HFY while rebuilding their civilization from near extinction. The galaxy watched nervously as fewer than 2 million humans, scattered across 1,000 worlds, began ensuring that tactical desperation remained viable military doctrine, because if humanity ever became too rational to destroy themselves for victory, the HFY would return to finish what they started, making the galaxy's greatest hope also its greatest fear.